And we are live. Hey, everyone. Going to give everyone a quick second to catch up here. But today we're going to talk about planning out your data roadmap. So if you're out there, either starting out to plan your strategy for 2024, or if you're just wondering how some people plan their data roadmaps, that's what we're going to go over today. So I'll give everyone just a quick minute to make sure we have everyone here that's supposed to be here. So I'll get started here in a quick second. Yeah, but hopefully you guys can also feel free, obviously, to ask questions throughout. Feel free to add some Q&A as I'm going through all of this. But yeah, I'm going to go just check out, make sure everything is looking good on all the sites while I wait. Oh, cool. All right, I'm going to get started. Let me present. All right, cool. So we can get started. Just a quick background. I assume most people know who I am, what I do, but just in case, for those who don't know who I am, my name is Ben Rogajan. I do data consulting. I've kind of consulted in multiple industries at this point, including like finance, insurance, transportation, and a whole host of other ones. And I offer basically end-to-end data solutions. So everything from setting up data infrastructure to finding the right data strategy to helping companies essentially optimize their various workflows that all center around data and using data effectively. So not just building stuff, but also making sure you're using it effectively. I also like to say I'm an accidental writer and YouTuber because as part of just being a consultant, I love sharing what I learn and sharing what I do. And so you'll find a lot of my stuff on YouTube, also written in multiple places, including my Substack and blog and so forth. But again, I think most people probably know who I am if you've been, if you're following this video. All right, so let's talk about the goal for today. And actually, now I feel like I should have put this image the other way, but basically our goal for today is to go over what to consider when you're planning, your data roadmap, our data roadmap. Basically, we want to just kind of go over that and talk about, hey, what should you be planning? What should you be considering? I want to discuss how you can align with the business. I think that's always kind of a challenge, making sure you're doing the things that the business wants to do, but also doing the things that are effective for your data infrastructure. Sometimes those don't always align right away. Sometimes you have to do step A to get to step B, which is what the business wants. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of both. Also want to discuss how to find impactful projects. So not just essentially doing any project, but also looking for the ones that will drive impact, the ones that either get you the promotion or aren't just busy work. I'll have some caveats there, but just putting it together. Also, I'll go over a little bit about putting together a pitch. So getting your project, putting together a 2-3 pages, maybe 1 page if you can, of just like what you're trying to pitch to whoever your director is, your CTO, etc. What you should cover in that and things of that nature. So cool. With all that, we can kind of dive into this and start talking through the various points. What to consider, and I'll probably share this because this slide in particular is definitely very, very loud and it has a lot of things. I was trying to go through like what you should consider when you set up your data strategy and when you're trying to plan out your data strategy, and I realized I just kept having more and more things that I would consider. And you don't have to consider all of these at all times. Different companies, different size companies will have different choice. Like you'll consider a different amount of these things, or you'll different points here will be more important. But in general, as I kind of referenced earlier, the key things are alignment with business goals, right? You don't just want to be doing work that essentially is for the data team. I think this often is something I've heard people say, like building infrastructure for infrastructure's sake, or just taking on projects that you think are cool because they're cool and you want to say you use the new tool. That's good to some degree, right? Like you want to make sure your business is up to date using the tools that are most appropriate, but at the same time you need to be making sure that the tools you do use don't impact the actual work you're doing. So the point of your job, whether you're a data engineer or a data analyst, is to take data and make it useful to the business so that they can make better business decisions. And if you go out of that and start focusing more on the tech side, you can start, kind of falling behind and not doing the right thing. Another thing is stakeholder involvement. So, as you're going through this, kind of as part of aligning with the business, but as you kind of go through this, making sure that you have your stakeholders involved in your process. As you're planning your data roadmap, make sure that they have buy-in, right? Like you don't just want to say hey, this is what we're going to do. Give a pitch to again your CTO, your CMO, whoever you're talking to, and not have buy-in from not just them, but possibly someone who's maybe one level below them. Because as you start rolling out whatever you're doing, you're going to need them to be bought in. You're going to need them to help with change management. You're going to need them to be helping with a lot of different steps along the way. And so if they're not bought in, at each step, it's going to be really, really hard for you to move forward. Another thing is just understanding where you're at. So I say audit your data maturity, audit your data, both your data infrastructure maturity, but also your data process maturity. It's one thing to have, again, really cool infrastructure. It's another thing to make sure as you're building either a new dashboard or as you're building new solutions, that whatever you're doing is being utilized by the business. And if there isn't a process that, hey, we built this thing, was it useful? How useful was it? What wasn't useful about it? To have that conversation, then, whatever you build doesn't necessarily matter. So make sure you don't just have maturity in terms of infrastructure, but also maturity in terms of what the processes are that you have that drive what you build. So I think it's really important to think about that as well. Don't just think about your infrastructure maturity, but also, how does your business actually use data effectively? Next is, talent and training. I think this is one of those things that gets missed. Again, you want to do all the cool things, but you don't consider who you currently have in terms of your talent that can do the work, right? You can start making these big plans, but if your talent doesn't have the background, it'll be really difficult for them to work with. Budget, obviously. We're going to talk a little bit about budget in a few slides where I'm going to talk about ways you can kind of get more budget or ways you can kind of either trade off budget, because that's always something, right? We need more headcount, we need more budget, we want to buy a new solution. How do you do that? And of course, prioritization. So picking the right projects to actually take on. Also, having a phased approach is important, I think. And then data governance and quality, I think, go without saying, right? You want to make sure you incorporate all of this as you're planning out your data strategy for the following year. Again, if you're a small company, you're one person, you probably won't do all of this. You're probably going to be focusing on a few key points here. Or at least at different levels. If you're a massive enterprise, yeah, you're probably taking on a lot of this, and you probably are planning out maybe even for 2 years, and then going to check again in 1 year in terms of how you're doing. So it will depend on the size of company that you're at. You don't have to read this as the Bible, and in fact, there were other things I didn't include in terms of what to consider. But I wanted to just show that there's a vast amount of things that you should probably be considering when you're setting up your data roadmap for the following years. Again, I'll probably put the slides somewhere so you guys can find them, so you can look through this specific one. All right. Again, feel free to keep asking questions, but I'm going to go for now. So I want to give some examples of areas that you might be aligning with the business. So more specifically, what the business might say, and then what you can think about it. So when you go to the business, they're not going to say, we need a dashboard, we need an automated process. More than likely, what you're going to do is you're going to go and talk to the various teams that you're working with. Maybe you're going to talk to the CTO, maybe you're going to talk with the CEO, maybe you're going to talk with directors of marketing. And they're going to give you various lines we want to improve customer retention, we want to expand into new markets, we want to develop new products or new features for the current product. And all of those have opportunities, obviously, for providing data somehow. So for example, I think customer retention and loyalty is probably the easiest thing that you can do, where you can obviously do at least the baseline is give them an idea about customer retention in terms of like churn and things of that nature, right? That will give you kind of a general idea of like how you're retaining customers. But if you go a level below that, you can also then give them information about the types of maybe people that are being retained versus the types of customers that are not being retained, and like what is the impact and how does that impact the overall business. Market expansion, kind of similar in the sense that like you can tell your current, your leadership, give them data in terms of like the certain markets they're strong in, the type of attributes these people have, where you're picking them up from, and then say and start doing research into new markets and what are similar markets. And then product development, as you're building new features, making sure you have like good A/B testing frameworks and things that can actually allow them to make good decisions on what features to make, and also understanding what features currently work are all little places that you can help. So basically, once you've done all this, you've talked to all of the business, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to talk to the business to understand what they're trying to do, the problems that they have. They might give you, again, these high-level things. They might give you some more specific needs, like we want to automate process A, we want to automate process B, etc. You're going to talk to all of them. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to create a giant list, coming with who the team is. You're probably going to also add a person of contact, so whoever the champion could be, obviously some notes on a project, some level of like urgency and impact, all together on a sheet, and you can just have this rolling sheet. That's what we kind of ended up doing at Facebook, because we would just have this rolling sheet of all the projects that we were being asked to take on, currently taking on, just all the various levels of work that we were doing. And that would help us kind of start making decisions in terms of like, okay, what projects do we want to do? Again, so step one is you're going to spend a bunch of time talking to the business. You're going to understand their pain points. You don't have to be just asking for specific projects. I like the idea of like going out and just trying to understand their business and what they're doing, right? Understanding the workflows that they deal with on a day-to-day, because that will generally translate into problems or solutions that you might be able to find. So you don't have to just ask, what projects do you want me to take on? Because the business might not know what you can do or what you can even offer. You kind of need to almost start that conversation and say, hey, what's currently the problems you're struggling with this year? What's currently, what are your current key workflows? How do you currently manage those workflows? Oh, there's an Excel sheet. Where's that data come from? It really is about talking through this process and not just understanding the projects that they give you, because there's going to be projects that they think they're going to need, but it's also understanding what they're not asking for, because those could be opportunities that you could offer, maybe a higher impact project. And so I like the idea, again, of going out, spending, you can do this like once every 6 months, once every quarter, and just re-understanding what is going on in the business, becoming familiar with who's working on what, and possibly finding those new projects. And I think this is one of the areas that, if you want to stand out both as a data leader, and also just even if you're a data engineer, you can, because having that ability to cross the line, having that ability to make relationships that go beyond just doing work, beyond just being the transactional process, gives you that ability to be more in tune with what's going on, and then deliver projects that are more aligned with what is being asked. Again, you can use this some sort of basic sheet that you're keeping track of all the projects, but when you really talk with people, I think that's when the real projects start coming out. That's when people start talking about exactly what they need, when you have a more less transactional relationship and more of a genuine relationship. So that's just some tips in terms of like aligning with the business and why it's important. Again, you kind of have to understand what they're doing, their pain points, and you need to translate those into projects. You shouldn't just assume that because they've told you they need something automated, that is the best thing you could be doing with your time. There could be far better things you could be doing with your time. It's just about you finding those things. So hopefully, again, this was helpful in terms of like aligning with the business. Cool. Let me just see if there's any quick questions worth. Will this be recorded? Yeah, so this is recorded. You can probably find it on my YouTube. Let's see. And yes, I'll put the slides up later. Oh, someone asked my channel name. Someone asked for my channel name. You can just look up the Seattle Data Guy on YouTube, or without the Seattle Data Guy. I can maybe put together a template for this. I have a few questions in terms of assessing people's data maturity, but I don't have a template on me that I can share right now. All right. Any other key questions? No. All right. Cool. Just want to give everyone a chance to catch up. All right, assessing where you're at. So there's this classic chart you'll see, which is like the descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive chart. I think the interesting thing here about like this idea of maturity, or at least like degree of sophistication, and the competitive advantage that you get from it, is that you'll find companies and data teams at all varying levels of this in varying areas, right? Like maybe you've got a great marketing team that is doing things that are, maybe more diagnostic in terms of the work that they're delivering. But then your operations team is really only counting, essentially counting how many processes they're dealing with. So, you can look at this chart, and I think even it can even vary at the same team, where one dashboard might be very, very, even has some level of predictive analytics in it, whereas maybe another marketing dashboard only has descriptive. I don't necessarily think that assesses your ability in terms of like maturity with data. I think it's far, far larger than that. Again, you've got varying areas that you're going to care about in terms of assessing your maturity. Data infrastructure being one of them. It's not the only piece, and it's not even the one that's like most important. I think it's the easiest one to feel like you can measure off of. Do we have a data lake? Do we trust our data lake or data warehouse? Do we have streaming data pipelines, etc.? But at the end of the day, like data infrastructure, whatever you're using, is only really meant to help you make better decisions. It's not necessarily meant to tell you that you're good at making decisions. So whatever your data infrastructure looks like, if you're just using Power BI directly attached to your source system, I mean, obviously there's some negatives there, but if that's what you're using, but you're making really good decisions off of that, and you have solid processes, that could be argued that is a more mature system than a company that is, floundering to put out a data warehouse and haven't made any good decisions and don't have any good processes around their data and how they make decisions off of it. So tools are good and they're meant to make things easier, but they can become this distraction from the actual thing you're trying to do, which is use data to either make better decisions or serve your customers better, find opportunities, all of these other things. And if you're not doing those other things where you're actually delivering output, the input of, investing hundreds of thousands or, whatever you're putting into infrastructure matters a little less. So that's why, you're not just assessing your data infrastructure. You also want to assess how you're actually using said data. So your processes around it. Do you have an overall like success way of like calculating success of your projects, right? Like not just in terms of like, yes, we've delivered this work, but people are using this dashboard, or people are using this metric, or people are, we've implemented this model and it's clearly driving, new sales or new something. So it's really important to consider that, processes are part of this, and in fact, arguably one of the key parts, because if you don't have things around, how you're doing or how you're injecting data into everything, all that money you're investing, even if you have predictive analytics, it doesn't matter that much. So it's important to consider that. Next, KPIs and metrics. So one thing I really liked when I talked to Ethan Aaron from Portable was he brought up the fact that, when he was in charge of metrics and KPIs at I want to say it was LiveRamp, he limited how many metrics and KPIs they were using. He wasn't trying to be in charge of 30,000 dashboards. He wasn't trying to, manage 100,000 metrics, because he didn't view that as valuable. He was like, at the end of the day, the business can only manage X amount of metrics, right? Like the business can only respond to so many KPIs, right? If you only have 100 employees and you give them 200 metrics, one, it gets hard to know which metrics matter, which KPIs matter. And two, it's hard to understand how to respond when those KPIs change and things of that nature. So I think there's some maturity there in knowing which KPIs are the actual KPIs your business cares about in the moment. So going through that process of being like, okay, what KPIs are we currently managing? Which ones are actually driving our business? Like, do we have ways that we can literally do things when we see this number go up and down? Do we know what to do? Does the business know what they're going to do? And are there other KPIs and metrics that maybe we should get rid of? And same thing with dashboards. Are there things that are making it messier and harder to make good decisions. So I think that's really, really important. Oh, I realized that for some reason I don't know what this last one was going to be, but apparently I left a little tag there. Cool. But then next after that is teams and talent. So I think it's always important to understand what your current team and talent has to offer. Right? If you want to do ML, that's great. But if your team's a bunch of data analysts, maybe ML is not the best place to be immediately. Or you should hire, a senior ML engineer or senior ML consultant to come in and upskill your data analysts so that they are able to deliver effectively on that. So just considering, where your teams and talents are before going forward. And same thing with budget and resources, right? Like if you have a $10,000 budget for tools, or you can only employ one analyst, there's only certain things you can do, regardless of how fancy you want to be, regardless of what you want to do. You have to tell your business, hey, I know you want to do XYZ. We have one analyst. We have one, we really only have this one tool, and it can't handle what you're asking. So making sure that all of that goes into the discussion of assessing where you're at and what you would need to get to the next place, right? Because that's part of this, is like a data roadmap is really understanding where you're at and putting a clear target on where you want to go and what needs to happen to get there. Again, if you need more budget, if you need more talent, if you need to get rid of some KPIs, if you need to improve processes, if you need new data infrastructure, that all gets kind of listed out in your data roadmap to get, again, from point A to point B. So cool. All right, as you're doing all of this, again, you're going to have this giant list of projects to do. You're going to have some things that are going to be more for your data team, where it's going to be like, we need to do migrations. We need to, build a data warehouse. We need to improve data quality. You're also going to have the business that's going to have a ton of requests. We want a new dashboard. We want to build automated workflows. All of this. And you need to figure out which ones you can actually do. Again, you only have so much talent. You only have so much budget. You only have so much time. You need to figure out which projects are most important. And now I've kind of taken this picture from a newsletter that I put out, but it was written by Ryan Peterman. He's got a great newsletter that you can go find. I think it's developingdev.com or developing.dev, not .com. I want to say, or developer.dev. But this is really the chart we used at Facebook, and I'm sure it came from somewhere else first. But it's just to find projects worth doing, right? I think the only axis I might add is urgency. So I had urgency included. But other than that, this is a great simple way of saying, hey, do you even care about this project? So, obviously, if the project's easy to do and it's impactful, always worth doing, especially if you're new. I put quick wins over there. If you're new, if you were just hired, I think it's really valuable to start getting those quick wins in. If you can find projects that you can show that you can deliver value, not just because you're trying to only hit, as they like to say, the low-hanging fruit, but because you need to build trust early on. I think it's really important to find those projects, right? Hey, if this is easy to do and you get impact and you can show that you can deliver, because even if something is easy to do, execution is still hard. So showing that you can deliver on work helps you buy trust, helps you buy influence at your company, and then you can take on those larger projects that are possibly harder to do, but maybe have a higher impact. So you can take those bigger risks. So that's why a lot of people will, say, hey, find those easy to do projects that you can deliver on before trying to, expand like crazy. Again, I like the idea of less is more. This kind of goes back to what Ethan Aaron said, but I think I'm trying to remember who else I heard talk about this, but a lot of leaders that I've heard talk recently have talked about how they have tried to focus in on a few areas that their data team was really going to key in on. Maybe they only do dashboards and automated workflows, and that's like it. They're not going to take on ML. If they want to do ML, that's going to be a new team, but that's not going to be their team. They're not going to take on every dashboard request. They're really going to make sure that they consolidate whatever dashboard they do have and make sure you only have one or two key dashboards per department rather than having 20 depending on what is needed. So really trying to make sure that the business is focused in and doing what is effective. Obviously, again, different levels of maturity, different levels of needs at different companies. So maybe you can't always fight back there in terms of less is more, but the more you can focus in, the more likely you can drive more value at the company. I also put in consider urgency. I think that's always a good metric. Sometimes, maybe there's two projects of equal impact, but one is clearly more urgent, right? Like that makes it kind of clear. And then again, get stakeholders involved throughout this process as you're figuring out what projects to do, as you're deciding what projects to do, as you're delivering those projects. All throughout, you need to be communicating with the stakeholders. Being transparent with them. If you have a champion, you want to make sure that they're constantly excited. Part of it's not just like making sure that they understand that the project is, succeeding or failing, but making sure that when the project actually lands, they're still as excited as they were on day one, because business stakeholders have tons of other projects that they're likely managing, and you want to keep them as excited about whatever work that you're doing from day one to day 365 when you deliver, so that when you deliver whatever is delivered, they're going to be the champions who on the business side get everyone excited to work on said project. So, it really is about making sure that they're constantly involved, and prioritization is a great place to keep them involved, to show them what you're thinking, why you're thinking it, and helping them understand which projects you're taking on. So throughout that process, again, communicate with them and don't cut them out. So yeah, again, prioritization always key to making sure your data team is successful. You only have so many people on your team to do anything. All right, once you start to do all this, you start to understand which projects you have, you align with the business. You're like, okay, here are the projects I should have. You start to understand what your team is doing. It's like, hey, my team is focused on dashboarding, etc. Once you understand what your priorities are, you can start putting together a pitch. And more than likely, that kind of has some key areas, like, obviously the project title and basically some sort of summary of that project, who the business stakeholder is, what should be attached somewhere in this pitch as well. Again, you'll likely just do however short you can make it. The shorter, probably the better, because it's going to whoever you're trying to ask for budget from. So yeah, include that business and stakeholder. What's the impact? Who are you actually impacting? Making sure that that's a clear statement with clear, numbers. If you can prove that, teams in terms of which teams are going to be impacted, hours saved, all of these things are going to help get buy-in from management. General schedule. So how long do you think it's going to take? And then like what, if you can give a flow in terms of like expectations, so that, whoever you're pitching to has an idea there. Dependencies. So are there certain projects that need to occur first before other ones? So you can have a little phased out approach. Risks, of course. So what are the risks that this project no longer succeeds or fails? And also, what are the risks if this project doesn't occur, right? So a little bit of both there. What are the risks that this project succeeds? What are the risks that the project fails? What are the risks if this project never happens? Maybe give a little tidbit about why this project and not others. Again, you've got tons of projects to do. Which ones are you actually focusing on? And then also, the last part's generally, do you need budget or headcount for this? And this is going to be the hardest part, right? Because you've got to somehow convince whoever you're asking for either more money or time or headcount. And so if you need more of that, this is generally the harder part. And so that's why I've got this next slide put together, just in terms of like getting budget and buy-in. So, there are a lot of different ways you can get either increasing budget or more buy-in. For example, you can kind of pitch one project to get to the next project, right? So for example, maybe you're being tasked by management to do more ML work, whatever that means. Add ML into your systems, add an ML ops system. Maybe that there's another problem that you've been wanting to fix forever. So for example, centralizing BI vendors, that's always a constant problem. Everyone's got way too many BI vendors. So it's like, how do we get to a point where we can actually afford to do this ML system? One place might be if you've got two very expensive BI vendors, or three. Maybe you also spend some money on consulting because you've got three different BI vendors. You have to pay for consulting services because you only are good at one of them with your team and you don't do all of them. Then maybe that's a great place to say, hey, if we can do this centralization project here, we can save 150K. And based off that, that opens up budget for either a new headcount, to do this ML system that we need, because we don't have that talent currently. And so you can have that conversation, right? Like another one is like, hey, a hard project sometimes to get buy-in for is like improving data quality. But if you can say, hey, that's going to save 8 hours of engineering time, and then probably not just that, but we are going to have less bad decisions made. We're going to have all of these things. If you can start making that and articulating what that value is in this project that you're going to be doing, and obviously being more clear on the project, improving data quality is pretty generic. Probably focus on a few key areas, but if you can articulate what the value is, and then what that can lead to, that's likely going to help get in buy-in. And then finally, I like to say hiring a data engineer. So this one I've come into a lot is a lot of teams, when I get hired as a consultant, there are a lot of solid software engineers, but generally they're really, really busy. They don't have time to take on all this new work. And so essentially, hiring a data engineer can be a great way of saying, hey, we want our software engineers to focus on, building new features that can make money. And we keep having to build these data pipelines. And it's really, we're slow, the business is complaining about us. What we need is to have a person that does this, and that's their job. And so that's a great way of saying like, hey, we need new headcount for data engineers so that we can start delivering work faster. So starting to think about not just, the projects you want, but also sometimes the ways that you get to the projects that you want to do, especially, again, trying to align with the business. And this is what I mean when I talk about like dependencies, creating a phased approach is like, hey, sometimes project A leads to project B. So just a way to consider this as you're building your roadmap. Some final tips I have for anyone out there. I only meant this to be about a 30-minute talk, and then I'll open up to QA here in a second. So feel free to start asking questions, please. I'll start answering them if you have them. But some final tips overall. One, don't forget about maintenance. One thing we always did at most companies I've been at, but we did this very clearly at Facebook, is we just assumed about 20% of our time would be maintenance and ad hoc tasks, right? To some degree, you're never going to get fully out of doing some maintenance and ad hoc tasks. It's just part of the work that you're going to be doing. So you might as well assume that about 20% of your time, or whatever makes most sense for your company, is going to be maintenance and ad hoc tasks. So all this other work can happen, but I think it's important to have that in mind, because when you go to your management, you could say, hey, I know you want me to do all of this, but 20% of my time is going to go here regardless of what you want, right? Like I can't get around this unless we either hire more people or something. And even when you hire more people, then you just build new infrastructure that you're going to have to maintain. And so there's kind of this up-down effect where it's like, okay, you've now just built more infrastructure. Now you need to maintain it. Now you're back at that 20% rate. So it's kind of hard to get out of that. I also like the idea of finding a clear vision for your team. Again, are you guys the analytics arm? Are you driving like KPIs? Are you doing the automated workflows? What is the reason that your team exists? And like, what is the clear value that you're offering? Because then I think you can have that conversation better with the business in terms of like exactly where you're at and what you're offering the company. Otherwise, any tech tasks that happens to come the business's way is going to come to the data team or come to whatever team you are. So having a clear vision in terms of like what you offer, I think, is very important. And then finally, understand where your company's at. I think some people want to be in a strategic point. They want to offer some sort of strategic abilities with data, but at the end of the day, your company's a service arm, and that's just all it's ever going to be, because that's not your company. Your data team is a service arm. Because at the end of the day, that's all kind of essentially what the business wants you to be. They just want you to give them data. They don't necessarily want the strategy. They're not going to pay for it. They're not going to really support it. Even if they say that they do, it's one of those things where you can kind of see what the business does and be like, okay, yes, they say they want us to be part of strategy, but at the end of the day, they either don't give us the budget for it, or they're not putting us in a position where we can succeed that way. So maybe we just need to keep giving them data, and that's our role here at this company. Again, you can kind of try to be out of that, but some businesses will just never let you, I think, escape that to a degree. And that's okay. So I think that's also a point. It's like that's okay. You don't have to be too stuck on that. All right. So Q&A. Oh, I left the template here, but Q&A. I'll let you guys ask some questions. I'm gonna go back and see if you have any. Let's see what questions you have. Can you say more on how your workout estimated impact? Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways. Some of it's very easy, right? Like some of it's going to be like, hey, we're spending a ton of money. Again, I talked about like on multiple BI vendors. We know what the costs are there. We can clearly save that. Like we can clearly save about 200K a year, 100K a year on if we centralize these vendors. So those are easy. Some other ones might be around, if you're talking about operations, you might know kind of in general how much maybe a workflow costs. So you might be like, okay, we currently spend about $2 million on whatever the workflow is. If we can optimize it by 10%, maybe that's the goal you set, and that's what you think you can do. That's $200,000 saved. So, you can also add in things like hours. So how many hours were saved to a project? Like if your company or your team is taking on a task, or another team is taking on a task that takes them 40 hours a week, between 10 people, and you can save that somehow, then you can arguably, say, okay, that's 160 hours of people time. If you want, you can add, in theory, how much money that is, but at the very least, you can add in the automated people time that you've kind of saved. So generally, you find something. You find some sort of number in terms of like what you can actually save there. Let's see. I will try to provide the file. Let's see. I'm just going through questions. Someone's recommending you take a book, Data Literacy in Practice. Actually, I haven't read this one. So that sounds interesting. Interesting. So I think someone's asking for consulting work. Like how can you find more consulting work? That's interesting. I like GIS in particular is also very specific. I can tell you like how I get clients. I mean, this one has less to do with road mapping, but I imagine you need to start like not just reaching out to people, because I get a ton of cold DMs from people who are trying to sell. They're like, hey, we have a team. We'd love to like work with you and basically do BI work for you. And I'm going to ignore most of them because I have no idea who these people are. So if you want to like stand out, you need to do something that gets you noticed, probably here in the US. So that either means you have to like write articles that get you noticed, or build connections with essentially with what am I going to say, with either consultants or companies here. But you have to do something to build that trust, because there's tons of people who reach out, again, even to me, where I don't think I have that much to offer most people reaching out in terms of like work. I get cold reach outs all the time, and I'm like, I don't know who these people are, and so I'm not going to kind of respond unless I have some more trust. So I think that's always important. Would you have any special recommendations if you were a very early startup? I think my special recommendation here, if you're trying to set up your roadmap, is to be honest where you're at. Like if you're a company of 10 people, you might not need a data warehouse, right? Like you probably don't. You probably can get away with just building things, using Excel or using something that sits on top of your data warehouse that runs some basic queries to answer key questions, right? What's great about being a startup, especially if you're just getting started and you're just starting to figure out what works and what doesn't, is you have a lot of time to set up processes and which metrics actually matter, right? Like you don't have to like be trying to do a gajillion things because your company is taking on 30 or 40 different strategies. You are probably able to focus on the two key strategies that your business needs right now, right? Like customer acquisition and maybe some things around product. So you don't need to be like developing massive systems to get all this data, but instead you can focus on just doing basic things right. So you can start setting up the processes that set you the right way rather than trying to catch up or do all these other projects. Do you have any tips for dealing with clients who don't like to spend money? That's a funny question. I mean, generally, I try to figure out like people's budget. early on and figure out like, hey, how much do you actually want to work on this project? Mostly because to me, it's like if someone's not willing to invest in a project or invest in my time, it's like I don't know what I could do for them, right? Like if you want to just do things cheap, that's great. But how much value am I going to actually drive if you're just trying to do things like that? I think for me, what I do is again figure out if you can talk to them and be like, hey, here's the opportunity that you're losing out on. Here's what I think you could, I think you could increase whatever your sales by X% if we added in, better marketing. I think I could save you $300,000 of Google ads if I went and did an analysis. Generally, you're gonna have to talk to them in that regard, in terms of like figuring out ways that you can actually like save them money, because that's what they care about. But at the same time, they're still always going to be trying to save money. Like even if you save them $300,000, they're still going to try to save $10,000 on your bill too. So it's kind of this kind of forever trying to save money and never trying to like invest mentality. So the best way you can do it, again, try to help them figure out where they can save money and just show it to them and be like, hey, here's opportunities I think you could save money on, and lead them in that. But also understand that most likely if their mentality is to essentially save money, they're always going to be trying to save money, and they're going to rarely be trying to invest into new things. Yeah. So I mean, here, let me give you this YouTube link. So someone's asking for where I'm going to do this. So I'm right here. So yeah, you can watch this here. Oh, I'm gonna have to go to LinkedIn though. Okay, here, let me reply to this one. So there you go. That's where you can find this later. Again, please feel free to keep asking questions. Again, the whole point of this was to give you kind of a precursor in terms of like planning out a project or like your roadmap, because it is that time of year where you can start doing it. Like if you want to start taking, like if you haven't done this before, it's a great opportunity to just like really lead your company. I think you don't have to wait for them to tell you the work. You can go find it. And maybe you know that, hey, I'm going to be able to plan out maybe 2 projects, and then the rest of the work is going to be ad hoc requests and whatever. It's still great to be in a position where you've like taken some control, I think. Again, some companies, they're just never going to shift out of being, treating a data team as a service org. That's just how they view you. They view you as a cost center. They view you as a way to, just get some numbers and, keep you as cheap as possible. You can kind of consider it like they consider you more of like an accounting department, but for, their numbers and some other things. So if that's the case, I think it's important to figure that out quickly and then figure out if you like working in that situation, right? Not everyone likes that situation. It's kind of nice though to a degree, right? Like it's kind of nice to only be asked for certain numbers and not have to do too much new things. So some people like it, some people hate it. How do you lead companies that are excited about AI but have no idea how to get there? I mean, I think there's a couple different things. You can first obviously talk about what you think they can do. Like be like, hey, here's one. Let's do a quick assessment. Let's do a month where I look at what you have data wise, and then I kind of give you a pitch on, hey, here's some projects I think you could take on, like in terms of AI type projects. But also add in, but here's again, like sometimes part of it is just here's project A, B, and C that you need to take on in order to get there, right? Like maybe you're not there yet, but here's how you get there. Maybe it's going to take 12 months, but we're going to get there by building the slow process of getting better with data. So I think it's about making sure people understand, one, not most companies, like many companies are not using AI effectively, and that's okay. If they can use AI effectively, yes, they can get an advantage from it. But most companies are still trying to figure out how to count how many customers they have. Mostly not because they're incompetent, but because companies constantly merge and then are acquired and break apart, and all of that makes it really hard to keep even basic metrics in line, which is why I like the idea of doing less metrics and not more. But yeah, like building up that muscle takes time. So you need to build up the key infrastructure that you can rely on, and having them have that conversation like, hey, we can't just build this from nothing. And here's what we need to do. And yeah, I'm excited too. Here's what I think we could do with AI. It'll take us 12 months. It'll take us a year. It'll take us 2 years. But here's the roadmap. Here's what we need to follow if we want to get there. Ben, let us know if you're going on an upcoming podcast or speaking at any conferences soon. I mean, I have a virtual conference, but I'm not going to be speaking at it. I mean, other than maybe like the keynote. But yeah, there's a virtual conference. It's you can find it all over. I've posted about it a few times if you've missed it. Here, I'll post it here just in case. But yeah, please do check out the virtual conference. Although I won't be speaking at it, we've got a lot of great speakers. Everyone from I need to figure out the speaker list. I can think of a few off the top of my head, but there's so many good speakers. We've got people from data science side, data engineering side. I should probably talk about this more. But yeah, you guys should check out this conference. We're partnering with data engineering and machine learning data engineering things to put it on. So Shinran is partnering with us on that. So it's great, and the rest of your team. So this is less of a data roadmap question, but yeah, to become a data engineer, is it necessary to first become a data analyst? Not necessarily. It's just a common path is the way I look at it. It's like, yeah, like 60% of people, I don't know what the number is. I'm making up a number. Some percent of people who become a data engineer are first a data analyst. So that's pretty not the standard. Interesting. So someone gave some advice here. Having a good foundation is critical before going to AI. 3 phases: startup, maturity, scale, growth. Yeah. I think that was I only saw LinkedIn member, so I didn't realize that was Daniel. Awesome. Yep. You're welcome, Richard. Cool. So someone's asking about like what's your opinion about like data fabric, data mesh, data virtualization? So how will that contribute to near future data strategies? I mean, I think some companies, like many companies who like have a data mesh don't even call it a data mesh. Like I think Facebook, we essentially had a data mesh approach when I looked at the principles of a data mesh. And really, it is more, I feel like a set of principles than a specific architecture. But we would follow that. Like we followed that without meaning to follow it, right? And so I think a lot of companies that like end up needing things like that will do it. I think if your company has a central IT team, the data mesh kind of ends up either losing the point, depending on how big the company is. Maybe you have some need for marketing to do their own stuff, but there's just varying reasons that people would use some of these solutions. And I still have never seen data virtualization fully take off. Like in some companies I have, but like it has its interesting spaces. Like it exists, but I still say I feel like data warehouse has existed or has like persisted longer, whereas data virtualization, I feel like at least for my last decade, it's existed. I think I've written about it multiple times in that period, and I've never seen it fully expand to the level of like a data warehouse in those 10 years. Doesn't mean it can't. I just haven't seen it. I think with like federated queries, though, you could in theory obviously see more of it because the more you can federate queries across various layers, the more value there. But in terms of how that would contribute to near data strategies, I mean, like I said, focusing on like the data infrastructure point, it's important. They are the tools that set up and make things easier, but sometimes they can miss the point in terms of like, well, but what are you actually trying to drive with the things that you're making? What are you trying to actually do when you invest in a data mesh or invest in a data warehouse or a data lakehouse or whatever? What's the actual goal? So. I look at data engineering as a growing community for the next 10 or 15 years. What do you think, Ben? 10 or 15 years is a long time. I mean, I imagine at least for the next 5, I can maybe speak out and be a little bit confident there. 10 years, it's hard to say. I mean, I've been in the industry for 10 years and a lot of things have changed. A lot of things haven't. So maybe it'll be more of the same. But, yeah. What's the usual cadence of data engineers during meetings or huddles? I think I imagine you're asking how often do you have maybe meetings or huddles or like stand-ups. It'll always depend team to team. Some companies will be once a week. Once a week tends to be, I think, a little too little. If you're doing kind of like a stand up, at least 3 times a week, I imagine is good. Sometimes every day can be a lot, but that again just depends on the project you're working on. Depends on what you're doing. But I don't know if that was the exact question. Would the Gen AI disrupt data strategy and how? I mean, I think at this point, the level we're at is Gen AI, we're figuring out how to use it. So I think at this moment, you should probably have maybe a little sliver of time put into how can you integrate it in. So are there ways you can integrate it in? The basic ways being like whatever, you can add like GitHub Copilot or whatever's safe for the business. But at the same time, making sure you think about still delivering the stuff that your business needs daily, because your business still needs to know how many customers it's serving, who's churning, things like that. Whereas, yeah, there might be some opportunities for some Gen AI work, but there'll probably be more likely solutions that you'll purchase that will do the work for you, and you probably will not be the ones building it. How do you make data as strategic and important in an organization when the data team is part of IT department, seeing as basic IT team? How do you shift the mindset from top management when they're not convinced? And I kind of covered this earlier. So first, there's a couple different areas. Like one, maybe you can, maybe by proving to the business that like, hey, we can save you money and clearly build products that either again increase revenue, decrease costs drastically, not just a little, but like some drastic impacts. Then they'll be convinced that like, hey, yeah, maybe this is a strategic component. Some businesses honestly can like operate with very minimal data. I think like, yes, lots of data is great. Some businesses can kind of do what they've been doing for a while, at least for the next few years, without much data. So it's hard to convince those companies, right? Like if they just have the basic numbers, they kind of know who their customers are, maybe because they're either a smaller business or because their business doesn't have a lot of moving pieces. It can be hard to convince those people to invest more, right? Like a lot of businesses will just view you again as an accounting department. You're just a cost. Yes, you add value, but your value should be very, specific. It should just be like, hey, you just give us the numbers. That's all we want. We don't want more from you. And sometimes that's just the mentality. I think I covered that earlier. Some people, that's the mentality. And I think it's most important to understand not just how to prove it to them, but to understand if it's even worth proving to certain people. Because again, certain people will never shift their mindset. It's just they believe that's your role, and they don't see you as anything else. And it's sometimes what it is. But if you have someone who maybe is a little bit open-minded, again, having that buy-in, showing different projects that you think you guys could do to deliver, and taking a chance and being willing to be wrong on those is probably what you're going to have to do. Let's see. I can definitely see Gen AI throwing a wrench in data roadmaps when teams figure out they need some type of data modeling or LLMs in order to reduce hallucinations, and improve data quality. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff around Gen AI, but I think that's the biggest thing is like you don't want it distracting you from still delivering the overall value that your company needs. Yeah, you should maybe start poking into it, but especially if you're at an enterprise, more than likely what's going to happen is in 2 years, some companies are going to build infrastructure that's far more reliable, or that your company will purchase, like they'll just acquire, and then they'll implement it in. That's why it's like Gen AI is important to like poke at and understand for most companies, but probably shouldn't be the focus, right? Like it'll distract you from delivering the basics, which companies already struggle to do. So that's how I feel there. It's hard to deliver the basics, honestly. Cool. Awesome. Well, let's see. Any other questions from anyone? No, we meant this to be an hour. An hour always goes by so fast. How many personal projects do you think one should keep in his or her portfolio for freelancing? Any tips related to this? I don't think there's a specific number, right? Like, I think it's going to be, one, if you do certain freelancing projects or if you do certain side projects that people see, they're just going to connect with it more, right? Um, Certain projects are going to speak to a possible person that's going to want to hire you to do freelancing work more. So, making sure you're actually doing work that maybe has some sort of tangibility to the real world. Like I did some healthcare fraud. It wasn't even a side project. It was just an article or 2 articles I think I wrote on it, and that had gained interest from people doing healthcare, as what they're what they wanted to hire from me for was like fraud detection in healthcare. So it's not necessarily a number. I'd say make sure you're doing projects that, one, use the tools that are the ones you want to consult in. 2, solving the problems that are real, or at least feel like can be like translated as real, and very clear. So I wouldn't focus again too much on like numbers, really, just quality and like making sure that they're like speak to whoever you're trying to target very well. Yeah, exactly. Wants to prioritize and attempt it. There's something there about like being willing to like stick your neck out and like actually succeed on it. It's hard. It's hard to do. Fan from Morocco. Thank you. Let's see. I'm just laughing at this because this person's had. It seems like you've had a lot of career shifts from BA, business analyst, to data scientist to data engineer. Yeah, that's not a strange workflow or a strange job flow. I feel like a lot of people have something similar. Cool. Well, I think it was pretty cool. We've had like almost 200 people between LinkedIn and YouTube. So that was really cool. Hopefully, you guys found this helpful. Again, I really liked it. I really liked putting together a deck for this. Again, it'll be shared on YouTube still, so you can go find it on my lives. It won't be on the video section. It'll be on the live section, so you have to go to lives. But other than that, hopefully you guys found this video helpful. And yeah, hopefully everyone has a good day. Unless you have any more questions, I can kind of leave it here. And thanks. I appreciate everyone who showed up. Cool. Not seeing questions. So I'm going to hit end stream. End stream. Thanks, everyone.